Hey, what's up, y'all? Greg Armstrong from the Gospel and Race podcast, and I'm taking a quick break from podcasting to talk to you about the Imago Leaders Network. Listen, family, I've been looking for a long time for a tribe, a crew, of people that understand the complexities of multi-ethnic church planting, leadership, and justice-related items, and we have it ready for you. We have developed a family of leaders who will lean on each other as we discover and develop tools to lean into multi-ethnic leadership. I want you to join me at our first interest meeting in September. The information's on the screen, but you also can visit imagoleaders.com for all the information needed. If you are a leader and you need a people, a crew, a family to discern the complexities of multi-ethnic leadership, the Imago Leaders Network is for you. Let's go. Spread the word, and I'll see you in September. All right, y'all. We're back. Gospel and Race podcast. This is becoming my favorite thing. Well, I can't say that. It's becoming one of my favorite things to do. I'm a pastor first. I love my church. Amen. But serving the church and talking about multi-ethnic, talking about race, justice. God is just opening this up to be a passion. But anyways, listen, I'm not getting into all that because today, our special guest, I'm telling you, I'm excited about this. I know we took a little hiatus for the summer, but we had to come back strong. And Dr. Dennis Edwards, everybody. Dr. Dennis Edwards is in the house.
Yay. I'm so glad to be here.
We're so glad to have you.
Thank you.
Dr. Edwards, thanks for hanging with us. Yeah. And I got to read off your vibe here. Well, I got to read this off. All right. Vice President for Church Relations and Dean of the Seminary at North Park Seminary or North Park University.
That's right.
Dope. Dr. Dennis Edwards, Reverend Dr. Dennis Edwards, PhD, is ordained in the Evangelical Covenant Church. This is our second covenant brother we've had on since. And is a highly accomplished New Testament scholar with more than 25 publications to his credit. Most recently as co-editor for a book on the Bible's affirmation that Black Lives Matter. Amen. Yeah. Dr. Edwards, you joined North Park in 2019 as a New Testament professor. Now you're the dean, church planter, pastor, reverend, scholar, writer. Let's go.
All right. Amen.
So good to have you.
It really is good to be with you, Greg. I was looking forward to this. Thank you.
Very much so. Same here. Now I've known you since 2018 when you came here.
That's right.
And this is a funny story because it's a similar story I told with Daniel Yang on a couple podcasts ago.
All right.
You tell me about your church planting days, multi-ethnic church planter, Minneapolis, Minnesota, also in D.C. area, the DMV, and Black scholar, writer. I ran up to Dr. Edwards and was like, listen, you are my mentor, bro.
You did say that.
Didn't I say that?
You did.
I said, you're my mentor. I'm following you. I'll do anything you say. And I think, and our personalities are obviously like, you're more introverted.
Yes, I am.
I'm more extroverted.
Yeah, which is good for a church planter.
It's good. Did I scare you off, bro?
No, you didn't scare me off.
Okay, right on.
I was excited about that.
But I took you to lunch, and I'm like,
that's right. I remember.
You remember that?
Yes.
We ate City Barbecue.
I remember it well.
And I said, listen, man, you're going to mentor me. You're going to teach me everything. I'm going to listen. I'm going to write. And I'm still taking that position, sir. Okay.
Well, I feel really badly now because I left Northern and I'm at North Park now. I'm like, oh, no.
No,
but,
you're still in the hood, though.
Yes. We still can connect.
So tell us what you been up to, what's been in your heart.
Well, yeah, thank you. I took the job as dean. It's been about a year. I'm starting my second academic year in the role. I still get to do, I don't really do any teaching, but I get to do a lot of speaking and connecting with people, stuff that I enjoy. I try to encourage my faculty and students, so that role I have there. And I'm a liaison for our denomination, the Evangelical Covenant Church, from my role at the seminary. And I get to do some writing and research, so I'm working on some things there too.
Yeah, that's excellent. And so a few things, because we're going to talk about this. Hold on. We're going to talk about Might from the Margins. Yeah. I remember when I think I remember when you turned in the manuscript for this.
You probably do, because I was at Northern then, I think.
Exactly,
yes.
or Northern Seminary with us
That's
then.
right.
And you turned in the manuscript, and I was looking forward to it. We traveled together a few times, and you spoke on this. And so it's been just a great staple.
Thank you.
This is my second copy, by the way. I got a copy that you signed for me.
Oh, yes. I remember.
We were at the conference a few months ago.
That's right.
But I'm going to jump right in because we don't have a ton of time today.
Okay.
Obviously, this podcast is geared towards the multi-ethnic church. But then even more importantly, it's geared towards addressing a biblical view of how to address injustice and racism in the church. The reality is there's racism in the church. There is segregation still in communities. There's still contention. And the reality is this. I believe, Dr. Edwards, that the multi-ethnic church is positioned to be, now specifically, I'm going to say this, specifically in my opinion, the multi-ethnic church led by persons of color in this season, don't trip on me, that it is the answer to the injustices that we're seeing in our communities, and perhaps we can invade the demonic oppression of racism if the church would actually step up. So I want you to riff on that a little bit.
Yes.
And then I got some questions to ask you, but let's just jump into multi-ethnic.
Well, I share that view. Honestly, I'm older. I've been at this for a while now. The church in Minnesota, I didn't plant, but I followed the church planter, and that was a church, the Sanctuary Covenant Church, that was boldly multi-ethnic, and we'll say now they are a black-led multi-ethnic church. We tried to do the same thing in D.C. at a church called Peace Fellowship. And then way back in the 80s, when it wasn't popular, I planted a church called New Community, and which doesn't exist now. But back then, the language was more like intercultural or multiracial. That kind of language was getting tossed around. But in all those places, I think the thing that I was learning over the years is how important it is for people of color and people who have been marginalized to be seen as leaders, and not just be seen as leaders, but to be the leaders, because there's a reality that as much as we might say we want multi-ethnic and church to be diverse, the way power is operated in our society is our society often defers to white people in power, particularly in Christian settings. So there needs to we need to see and feel and experience the leadership of people who aren't white. And I know that sounds harsh for some people, but the reality is we're in a messed up place right now to a large degree in Christianity in America. Polarized, we're divided, we're struggling in some ways. And the people who have been on the bottom, historically been marginalized, are the best exemplars of what it means to be followers of Christ. I believe that because I think that's borne out throughout the scriptures and even throughout history.
So you're planting churches in the You're planting a church in the 80s.
Yes.
Intercultural, multicultural, multi-ethnic.
Right.
What? Like,
I know.
That's kind of what I'm tripping on. Like,
right.
The 80s, planting a multicultural church. Where did this come from for you?
Oh, I appreciate that. My own background, I won't get into all of that because I'm old. Like I said that twice now.
You ain't old.
It's relative, right? But I'm a product of busing in New York City. So I was, grew up in African American neighborhoods, but I got bused to white neighborhoods. And so I was seeing, worlds that didn't really meet, And then when it came to Christianity, by the time I got to college, I was around Christians who are white Christians, many of them were involved in these campus ministries. And then African-American Christians, we were going to different church and had our own little Bible study. And I maybe it was just the idealism of the 70s that made me think, why are we always separated? Why can't we do some things together? And there were some moments when that would happen. And then by the time the 80s came along, I was going to a church that was largely white. It's a long story, but I stumbled into that church and didn't think I'd stay there very long. But then the pastor showed us, my wife and me, that there was this African-American pastor in that same denomination. So I got to meet him and realized, there were people who were talking about bringing people together. We felt like that pastor, me, my wife, others like us, felt like the church had this unique call to bring people together, something that was hard to do in our society. I mean, our society was divided, has always been divided.
Right.
But we felt like the church could bring that together. So for me, I said, yeah, the gospel is a good news message of people finding this unity with God, unity with each other. We say fellowship might be the word we use. So there's this sense of unity that we thought that the church should have and should exemplify. I was naive, I admit that, because I thought it was going to be easier than it was. I didn't realize how resistant some people would be to that notion. But even way back in the 80s, I felt like our divided society needed to see reconciliation or union or some way of us coming together, needed to see that happen and see that the gospel is powerful enough to make that happen.
That's crazy because, that's what I believe now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stand on the shoulders of folks like you, other scholars, who are helping us really navigate the complexities of multi-ethnic in 2023. What I'm struggling with is in the 80s, who were you reading, looking at? I mean, I can't imagine that it was as a crazy amount of pastors doing this, because especially black-led multi-ethnic churches, because we saw the boom of sort of the multi-ethnic, breakout, in the 80s, 90s, late 80s, 90s, early 2000s, when multi-ethnic really became sort of a system of sorts, right? And we're kind of clawing our way out of that. So,
well, I mean, I tend to not always want to name drop, but
sure.
But there was somebody who planted a church on the West Side, a guy named Raleigh Washington, and he was with the Evangelical Free Church of America, and a white denomination, had the first black pastor in there, and I saw how the vision sort of was created. Right, there's actually even a Christianity Today issue way back from, I don't know, it's like 86 or 87, something like that. That my wife is on the cover because the whole choir was on the cover of it. It says the gospel in black and white. I was actually there that day. I was with the choir with my saxophone, but I didn't make the picture.
I forgot to mention musician. I missed that piece.
Oh, that's all right, man. I played the sax and the flute, but the reason why I'm hesitant to drop the name is because there were some things that I learned that I did not want to reproduce, but there were at the same time things I learned that were important in terms of what it meant for, in this case, African Americans to be involved in these white evangelical spaces. I was watching it, I was experiencing it. So on the upside, that church gave me a sense that, oh, you know what, there's something new and different and right about trying to get us together across these barriers that society would have. And race is one of them, but also economics, so many other barriers, and I felt like the church should be able to break down walls. In fact, that's the book that Pastor Washington wrote with the late Glenn K. Ryan, who was a phenomenal community developer. They wrote a book called Breaking Down Walls, But I would say I moved from some of Raleigh Washington's philosophy of how he was doing ministry, but I shared some of the basics of being in a space that would model something that was different from the rest of the society. So that was part of my influence in the 80s. I have to say, there weren't a lot of models, and so consequently, we made a lot of mistakes, But we were trying. We just thought, if we raise up, this vision, people would come.
Yeah.
I was naive. They weren't coming for that. At least not many people.
So that's fascinating, but thank you for that, because a lot of the scholarship that I've gone after, it hasn't gone back that far. To be honest with you, into the 80s.
Well, I wasn't seeing scholarship. This was more practitioners. In fact, the person I shouldn't even leave out, but of course he was instrumental too, is Coach Wayne Gordon. When I was at the church on the West Side at the Rock Church, we were learning about what was happening in Lawndale. So I had to go visit over there when I was still a seminary student about to graduate to go see what God was doing over there.
Really?
And that was a church that had also been serious about reaching its community and bringing people together from different backgrounds. So that was another influence. But I would say, the scholarship was actually the other way. The scholarship was saying that you should not try to be multi-ethnic. The big scholarship at the time was coming out of Fuller and other places. The whole church growth movement had pushed something they were calling the homogeneous unit principle.
Yep.
And a homogeneous unit principle was how churches grow best with people who are alike.
Yeah.
So we were bucking the trend because at the time, almost all the scholarship coming from missiologists and other practitioners was that you should not try to get people together from different backgrounds.
That's
And
crazy.
not if you wanted growth.
Not right. By the way, shout out to Coach Wayne Gordon in Lawndale.
Yep, amen.
We got to get you on the podcast, Coach. Come on now. You retired.
Yes, make that happen.
Retired from Lawndale. Give me some time, Coach.
Amen.
The homogeneous unit principle.
That's right.
That was a study, right? I've read about it.
Mm-hmm.
There was a study that said that churches will grow, when they're with the same people.
That's right.
Do you think that was systemic? Do you think that was intentional?
When I look back now, maybe I look back with eyes of cynicism, but I definitely think that's the way white people viewed what was best, right? And they took some of their thinking from what they saw in mission fields outside of the United States, where they would go into places that were pretty homogenous, the places that people were a lot alike. And so maybe, to be fair, I guess it just seemed to them, it made sense that that's the way, ideas and relationships kind of work, right?
Mm-hmm.
When people are alike. And there is some truth to it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's a certain comfort level when you're with people. This is one of my professors back in seminary said it this way: when you're with people for whom you don't have to explain your terms. So yeah, there's something comforting about that. I mean, I'm certainly comfortable in spaces where there's a majority of African Americans. But there was something that's inherently racist, though, when you suggest that the way things have to be are dictated by sort of a white frame that sets the paradigm, sets the models for everybody. And that was happening in these kinds of conversations. So, I don't know, when you say systemic, maybe yes. I mean, I think it was...
Or maybe intentional.
Yeah, I think somewhat intentional. I mean, I try to be fair-minded to people in the past because I don't know what they were thinking, honestly.
Right.
But the way it was used felt racist. I'll just put it that way.
It did.
Yeah.
So it did feel racist. That's really what I wanted to get at. It did feel racist.
Oh, yeah.
That this homogeneous unit principle became the sort of the baseline for church growth.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I don't know fully how many people really took that on.
Yeah.
But I imagine that could be a part of the issue that we're trying to claw ourselves out of in terms of these.
I agree. I mean, just take one example. One of the big mega churches, I'm not going to call them out, but a couple of them I could think of would create this a model of the ideal kind of person they wanted to have that they were targeting for their ministry.
Yeah.
And this one, I mean, I remember one out in California, they showed a picture of a guy with, back then, this probably was the language we were using as a yuppie, that kind of language of somebody who had all their electronic stuff, whatever was that electronic we were using at the time, I don't know, but his briefcase and all that stuff. Anyway, they made actually a picture of that kind of person. This is well before avatars and all that, right? But they had a mock-up of this kind of person. And so did some other mega churches. And those people, of course, are white, So and one church that got planted, I remember hearing the guy who was really well known in the country saying his appeal was you want to go to church with people that you would go on vacation with, And he even came and spoke at my seminary when I was a seminary student. I mean, that kind of thinking already kind of creates this class separation, right? The people I'm going to go on vacation with. I mean, already that says you got the means, to go on vacation, and that a whole bunch of things that go with that. So I would say that, it was in those kind of spaces where they could create their model member, and that person be white and be upper middle class, be mobile, be so well off that they have property and all kinds of things that we were already saying by the way we were going to do church in America, at least within evangelicalism, that it had to look a certain way, and race was a big factor in that.
That's huge. I remember going to a church on the West Coast. We were touring this church, big old church, man, and I remember the tour guide, which is hilarious because that's how big it was. There was a tour guide. Tour guide was saying to us, it was very, very like seeker attractional. Our church, we don't sing songs about love and, because we attract middle-aged men, you know, because they're the ones that give and they bring their family. And,
interesting.
And we sing song, like we open up with a song by Metallica. I said, what? Metallica. And we, you know, and he starts naming all this stuff. And the more he talked, the more I was thinking like, you've iced me out of this church so clearly.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like you've told me who's supposed to be at this church.
Exactly.
Right? But the problem I have, Dr. Edwards, and here's what I want us to correct so that we can see some growth. The problem I have is when said churches say, we need diversity and we're going to champion multi-ethnicity.
Yeah.
And then they throw somebody black or Hispanic or Asian up on the stage.
Right.
But the frame doesn't change,
That's,
right? And so when I talk about clawing ourselves out of this kind of toxic multi-ethnicity, it's really this attempt to be multi-ethnic, which is drowned in tokenism, which is drowned in appropriation, and want to call it multi-ethnic.
Yeah.
I feel like there needs to be a clean slate. You know what I mean? Just wipe it all out, right? Just wipe. Just
I
don't.
have felt that way for sure.
Have you felt that way?
Oh, much in my
Just
life.
don't even say multi-ethnic. As a matter of fact, I've got friends who won't even acknowledge it anymore just because it's been so ravaged in many respects.
Yeah.
So I say we wipe it out. I say we reimagine through the gospel, multi-ethnic. And I want to get into this because in Might for the Margins, you talk about centering black voices. It doesn't have to be about black. It can be about any indigenous or persons of color.
Right.
Give us some talk about the importance of that, because I've gotten pushback on that.
Yeah.
And I'm not against white people planting multi-ethnic churches. I've said this before to all of our GNR crew. I feel like the turning of tables for white people to actually experience the empathetic nature of persons of color.
Yeah.
I believe I see it as like minerals and vitamins that they've never had to experience that comes out of the richness of a person of color's culture, right?
Good metaphor. I like that.
What are your thoughts on centering black voices or persons of color as we champion the multi-ethnic church moving forward?
Some of my work in Might from the Margins came out of my study of 1 Peter.
Yeah.
And in the book of 1 Peter, I mean, the whole letter is written to people who are on the margins of society. Yet, you know, there's some lines in there where the writer says, but you follow in Christ's footsteps, you know. There's this sense that they, in their marginal position as, and Peter uses the language of people of a diaspora, aliens, strangers, foreigners. He uses that language to say, look, you're not at home in this culture here, but you represent Jesus to this world, right? So already there's something about people in that marginalized space who represent Christ well in the world. Paul says it to the Corinthians, you know, you were not big in this world. You were people of low status, but God chose what's humble, what's lowly, you know, words to that effect, to confound the wise and the people who are, you know, in the upper echelons. So that's the way God has operated. So that's one piece. The other piece is how we do church, in that I've seen people, and I'll speak for myself here, I've worked in non-Christian environments. I was a school teacher for a while. And in those environments, when they talked about diversity and multiracial and multi-ethnic spaces, they really honestly tried to figure out ways that we could hear from each other and experience each other's culture. In white churches, I felt that it was much more symbolic. Like you said, there was a tokenism. It's to be able to say, well, we have those people coming here, but nothing shifted in terms of the way ministry was done. So it was almost as if our presence was desired for the brochure, or maybe later for the website, but not in terms of shifting the culture of the space, right?
That's good.
So for me, multi-ethnic means we're going to do something in a whole new way. We're going to do it differently. And the people who have been objects of injustice often know best how we fix those injustices. And that's why one reason why I appeal to a leadership being people of color, and as an African American, I speak from my context. So I would say, we know what it's like to be on the margins. So let us help lead the way in fixing some of the things that are broken in our society.
That's good. Now, I want to ask you a question. So I don't even think I've voiced this openly with folks before, but it's a thought I've had. So when we talk about, you know, Christianity shaping Africa, right? And I don't know where you stand on Africa Christianity predating,
Yeah.
white man's religion conversation. I believe Christianity had already settled in.
Yes.
Right. African.
Dr. Vince Bantu has written a lot on this.
Vince Bantu. That's exactly
he's a
who
good
gave
scholar on this. Yep.
Right. So when we look at the racial injustices in our country that have been led by the white people, now we understand that racial injustice, we can find this throughout the world, right? In various different ways. But in terms of America, I've thought to myself, especially around Floyd, that persons of color, having received at its origin like this connection with God, perhaps that was intruded upon by white people. Is there? This is a crazy question, so you don't have to answer.
I think I'm tracking. Go ahead.
Is there sort of it's like a wrath, right? Like a recompense in terms of when we look at slavery, we talk a lot about reparations, but I just think about this sort of in the eternal sense. And God's grace is powerful. God's grace is I'm not speaking damnation over people, but sometimes I think to myself, like the intrusion upon persons of color, especially in America, by white people, when God had already been at the center of Africans. Yeah. You know what I mean? How does God view that? Is that crazy?
No, it's not crazy. I think I know what you're getting at. I mean, I'll share my perspective here. There's something about the way the grace of God works, in that I'm going to wind up plugging a book that I have coming out in the fall.
Come on, plug it.
Well, it's a book called Humility Illuminated, and what I try to argue in there is that humility is really about our relationship with God and then our relationship with each other. But humility is what makes, I think, all the other virtues work in a way. Yeah. But my point, though, is humility is not grasping for power, right? I mean, we see that in Philippians 2 about Jesus, who in the form of God did not consider equality with God something to be held on to for personal gain.
Sure.
So I think when people think power is about securing my position and holding on to something, that there will be a reckoning, because God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. So I think that we see over time, in some form or another, God's opposition to arrogance and God's elevation of those who've humbled themselves and have submitted themselves to God.
You see how good he's making this sound? That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Keep talking, Dr. That's what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah, it was just flowing out of you.
Well, it doesn't always happen in our lifetimes, unfortunately, but I do think God works this way. But as I say that, I'm careful to not say that it's just about replacing white power brokers with black power brokers. I'm not saying that, right? I'm saying that the idea is that, in fact, when I wrote Mike from the Margins and I talk about power inherent in people who have the Spirit of God, who are not in the majority culture, it's not because I'm saying we want to have the same power that white people had. I don't want to make that case. Right. I don't want to have exploitative power. What I'm trying to say is we have a power that's different from that.
Yes.
And our power is coming because of how we were treated, but also because of who God is, so that we have this power to transform the way things operate, because we know what the bottom is like, and we have this perspective that's different from the people who've been on the top. So that's, for me, it's not about, again, knocking somebody out just to put somebody else on the throne. It's to say there's a better way, and you need to look over here in the place that you would have ignored before to see that better way.
That's good. All right, that's what I needed to sort out. So I love it. Let me ask you this: can white leaders lead multi-ethnic churches?
I struggle with that one a lot. I've gone back and forth because there are some good models. I mean, you had my good friend on this podcast, David Swanson.
And shout out to Swanson.
And a big shout out to him, because he's really unique in some ways. I guess my answer would be yes, but there's a lot of caveats to it.
I like that you struggle with that, though.
My struggle is, look, I'm sharing from experience, as well as I think there's data out there.
Right on.
When we were planting our church in D.C. called Peace Fellowship, and I left a church on Capitol Hill that was largely white, and I had become the lead pastor of that church and faced, basically racism.
Yeah.
And I wound up resigning. I was only 40 years old. I didn't know how to fight all of this by myself, and I felt like I was alone. And after I left, a lot of people left that church. They were disappointed that I left. They didn't all come with me. They all just left. And for about 9 months, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was finishing up my PhD. But we wound up planting another church. And several of those white folks, some of them who really connected with me, wanted to come. And we had a big conversation where we were discouraging that, because we said, here we are in this African-American neighborhood. If we're going to have like 100 white people come into the neighborhood, it's going to really change things and maybe send a different kind of message to our community. And when we were really, when I say we, this is now a small core of us at the beginning, we had some hard conversations about this. And one person just said straight out, look, white people always take over. And there was that sense, and I had felt it in my experience. I didn't want to like declare it as true for all time, but it really did have that feeling. And we said, if we're coming to serve this community, then let's make sure that the leadership of this church reflects this community and sets a good example for this community. Mm-hmm. So we said, everybody's welcome, but you have to respect our context. And we had some white people who left, when they, for whatever reason, some did articulate their reasons, but it was a struggle for us back then. But we came to the conclusion that our geographic context there in the southeast part of D.C. was that we did not need a church led by white people. Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah.
Because of the temptation to take over.
Yeah, and I saw it. I mean, it's been my life experiences, and I'm in my 60s now, and it's over and over again. I mentioned this in the book too, but there's that scene in the first Black Panther movie when when they're trying to get King T'Challa is incapacitated. I'm not going to give that away, but I'm sure everybody saw it. But anyway, but
you ain't seen Black Panther.
Yeah, right. But the royal family has come to get help from the Jabari tribe, and M'Baku is sitting on the throne. And of course, right when they try to plead their case, it's the white guy who speaks up first. Agent Ross, he starts talking, and M'Baku starts, banging his staff, and they start barking, and they drown him out. And I was like, yes, because part of me is, that's been my experience. Even though everybody there is black except for the one white guy, and he's the one who's going to talk. And that's been my experience. So that's what I mean by white folks taking over. There's almost this assumption, and not that it's calculated, it's just been built into our society. The assumption that the white guy is the leader, the white person, mostly a man, is going to be the one in charge, and we have to defer. Now, I know of models of white pastors leading in black neighborhoods. The question I would have is how empowered those people are really in that church. And that's always an open question for me.
Yeah. So what are you gonna? So I do got a lot of buddies who are passionate about multi-ethnic.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's not Swanson. That dude,
right? Yeah.
He's gonna get kicked out of the Caucasian
he better not.
assembly. Okay. But
I thought
what
you were
would
gonna say the denomination? Like, you better not.
No, not the denomination. No, we got love for Covenant. Yeah. But what do you say to my white friends who are like, hey, I believe, and I got white buddies who have got really, really great multi-ethnic churches.
Okay.
And I think they have great postures, but, what would you say to them? Do you have anything? If not, it's cool.
I think the basic question I'm asking is, from whom are you willing to learn and submit yourself? So sometimes I see white young leaders who are raring to go. Yep. They got their Bibles, they got their plans, they got their strategy for reaching these communities. And sometimes they go into communities that are Latino communities or African American communities, and they're going to set up shop and they're going to do their church and all of that. And they haven't necessarily stopped to learn from the folks who've been there already. That's one piece of learning, But also, some of us pay a lot of dues along the way, and I've certainly sat in my share of classes with only white faculty members, only white, denominational leaders. I've been in those spaces many, many years of my life. So I'm saying I paid a lot of dues. Yeah. So I feel like I can say whatever I want now. I'm over 60. I can what y'all going to say, what you're going to do. But I don't see white people paying that dues. I don't see white people sitting in spaces where they're in the minority, where they don't get deferred to, where they have to receive. So I would say for those young pastors, or maybe not all young, but for those pastors who are raring to go and work in those spaces, I say, pay some dues where you're not in charge. It's hard.
That's a T-shirt, bro.
I mean, but it's hard. I mean, I have a friend who did consulting for a denomination, and it's a T-shirt. That was good.
Pay some dues where you're not in charge. That's crazy.
Yeah. But he said he was giving advice to this church that wanted to be multi-ethnic. Excuse me. And this pastor was going to hire a black associate. And my friend who was giving the advice said, well, why don't you become the associate? And he just couldn't reckon with that the idea that he would be working for somebody black. But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Is we've done that. I mean, I paid my dues as an associate. I paid my dues
Lord
doing
Jesus.
a lot of stuff, and so that's a question I would have.
Okay, all right. I only got a couple minutes with you because.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got to.
No, you're good. You're good. We got the bishop, the PhD. Look, this is my man.
I'm not big on the titles, but I appreciate the love.
You're not big on the titles, but you got us. All right. Give me your take on the future of the multi-ethnic church. Maybe this is prophetic. Maybe this is something that you see. Maybe this is an exhortation to leaders.
Yeah.
But I think we all need to hear from you and your history. What are we stepping into, and what should we be looking out for?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing and will continue to see and should see are more people of color, and for me that includes women, who are leading churches.
Yes.
And are setting the tone for what Christianity can look like in America. And I speak from, my North American context here because that's what I know best. But I suspect that's going to be true in other places too. But that leadership is starting to emerge. We're seeing it more and more. And I think the future means that there'll be, your kids, certainly my kids, but your kids, my grandkids are going to be in churches that where it's going to be normal for them to see black people and other people of color in leadership and white people serving in those churches who aren't always the ones up front. So I think the future is learning having that view from the margin, from the bottom, that view being raised up and setting the tone for the future of the church.
Can we restore multi-ethnic?
Yes. I mean, I
call it a restoration because I just really see it as a travesty in many respects, But so that's why I see this work as a restoration.
Look, there's been fits and starts. I mean, I talk about it in the book. I mean, the whole Promise Keepers and all that stuff. I mean, I don't want to go backwards to all the things that evangelicalism tried, but I would say that maybe it's a restoration, but maybe it's a new thing. I don't know, but I honestly think the church will do better when it sheds itself from the white supremacy that it's been that's been like this bondage it's been under.
Are we still under that?
We still are. Yeah. Now that we is a broad we. I mean, I'm saying that we as Christianity in America, but maybe I'm talking more about evangelicalism in some mainline spaces. But there's largely a white way that's borrowed from Europeans to do church. But indigenous folks and other people of color in our country have kind of reshaped Christianity in some ways. That is what's going to come to the fore, and I think that's what's going to help revamp and maybe even revive Christianity in the United States.
Let's go.
Amen.
Dr. Edwards, we're going to get him out of here. But listen, Might for the Margins.
Thank you.
This is that book right here.
Thank you.
And the gospel's power to turn the tables on injustice. And thanks, man, for hanging with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
We got to do a part 2 because
I'd love to come back, man.
We need a good another hour.
Yes. I got a lot to say.
That's what I'm talking about. And so we're going to have you back. But thank you. We appreciate you. We love you. Thank you so much for who you are and what you do. Yep. And look, next time, y'all, we out of here. Gospel and Race Podcast. Peace.